Hello and welcome to the Darkside. This is Tabitha Purple and TC Storm. You're with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Now, how comes I can't see you?
That's all right. You just do what you're doing.
That's not nice. It's not fair. It's not right. I feel very like throwing my toys out of the pram. Okay, well, welcome to today's show. We're really glad that you're joining us. Today we have news. You'll probably see that we've structured it a little differently. Normally I do 3 news stories to start, and then we talk about one big story. But we have a challenge today, and the challenge is that there is a lot that happened in this week, and we couldn't narrow down which story to talk about. And so we're going to touch on a few different stories, and you're more than welcome to join in, ask questions, share with us, do what you're doing. But we're going to just give you some highlights, give you the dark side perspective on what's happening in the world. And so we're going to start with the one that we love the most. I enjoyed this story no end, I got to be honest with you. Will and Kate, the Royal Highnesses of the UK, decided to go on a 4-island trip of the tour of the Caribbean. They thought this would be a good idea, and it went down in flames. Oh my gosh. So as many of you know, we covered already Barbados independence. Yes. Barbados went independent. We're really, really proud of them. The island did very well. They're now a republic. They have got rid of the monarchy. Let's deal with the history of our people. Let's do the thing. But for some reason, off the back of that, what that would prompt the monarchy to do is to decide to tour other islands when the other islands were congratulating. And just to think about the bubble that you must live in, that you think this is a good idea. The other islands, when Barbados went free, were like celebrating and asking each other, when do we go? Should we go next? Is it our turn? Shall we rid ourselves of the monarchy as head of state? What shall we do? And then tutus, what you have hilariously is that they go on this tour. And I mean, by the time they got to the Jamaican Prime Minister, I've got to be honest, that man was dread. His speech, it couldn't have been more British if he tried. It's like it was hilarious. Like he just told the boy to his face, when you become king, you won't become king here. That's basically what he said. You understand? So this man has stand up so I shouldn't laugh, but it had me in stitches. It really had me in stitches, because there stood Will stoically, doing his thing. He'd been parading himself in regalia from the army and all sorts of things going on. And then this prime minister gave his speech and basically told him, go away. You will never set foot on this island as king. Because of course he's heir apparent, right? So when his grandmother passes and his father passes, it's going to pass to him. But the man told him straight to his face in a roundabout kind of way, enjoy your tour. This the last tour you go and do with any kind of moniker on you, because guess what? You're not going to be king here. Sorry, I sweetened myself. But, there's a deeper point to be made. And I think this really is a deeper point to be made. So on the American side of it, I heard a chat show host talking about it. And she was like, but us first here in America, if we're going to talk about reparations, us first. And I had to think to myself, there's a really entitled position that an American person has, because the diaspora is wider than the United States of America. Slaves were taken in huge numbers, of course, to the Caribbean, to South America, and to other parts of the world as well. But these were the places where they landed and spent the most of their time, and a majority of them landed, right? But of course, the narrative that's being spun to Americans is that you're the only ones, which is really sad, because you're not. And that distance that you immediately build between the two, as if we're somehow in competition with us. Like, you're not in competition. We're all in the same boat. We're all trying to upend this colonial system and have the history taught properly. And so there was a proud moment, of course, that the Jamaican president, he said what he said to the man's face: you are not going to be king on my island. Go away. That was hilarious. But he also But also there was a wider conversation happening, obviously, within the islands about the historical impact of why they're there, how they got where they are, what is happening to them. And, you know, the fact that there is still debt for some islands, there are still debts that keep them poor. There are still payments that they're making that really reduce the people's mobility and the ability to do their work. And, you know, the island is in debt to the tune of something it will never be relieved from. Somebody was talking recently about the fact that British taxpayers, including the British taxpayers of color, paid reparations to previous slave owners up until 2015. Understand, you as a person who was enslaved are paying the generational reparations. And when we as people of the diaspora begin to talk about reparations, everyone's like, yeah, but we're not going to give you money. Oh no, but we were happily paying our taxes to pay you money. Okay, so let's talk about that double standard. So there's a lot to unpack with that. And I'm guessing that the colonial history comes up again and again on this show. You guys are used to us, so you know we'll talk about it again. But I gotta be honest, I'm giving the Jamaican president his props. We stand strong with you, Jamaica. We saw you, and we heard you tell Will to his face, "You're not gonna be king here." And we appreciate and we applaud you here on the dark side. Mr. Storm, is there anything you would like to add to the farcical thing that is Will and Kate's visit to the islands? Drinking coffee, sir. Sorry.
Delicious. And I don't mean the coffee.
It was funny. It really was funny. I have to be honest.
I just want to touch on a couple of things.
Okay.
It was good to see the Jamaican Prime Minister say what he said, but the manner in which he did it was such a power move. Right? It's like
it was so surprised. He never tell him you're not gonna be king on that island. He never done
that. Look,
but he told him you're not gonna be king here.
Listen, it's more than that. It's the way he did it so publicly and confidently, and just dropped it. It's like he just came and you know, lay it on the table. You know, so I think that was good. Also, I just want to comment on two things. It's not Americans that are me first. It is, or that we're saying that. It was citizens of the United States that were saying, or some citizens of the United States.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Saying me first.
Yes. Some citizens
first.
USA. Yes. Indeed.
And I just want to point out to them, those that are in that demographic, you're not even the largest Black community outside of Africa.
Oh no. Come on.
So how do you think those other Black people got there? And why do you think they're there? So the sense of entitlement that there is, that you must be first in the queue, based
the United States of America.
What are the criteria in which you're using to say us first?
Yeah.
It's not the largest.
That title falls to Brazil, doesn't it?
Yep. It's not the poorest.
That title falls to Haiti, doesn't it?
Right. So what is the criteria to say that you should be first in line for any talk of reparations?
It's the United States of America.
Okay.
That has a bigger influence than the Blackness.
Yeah, so I those are the points that I want to bring out. It's the fact that actually it was a big power move.
Yeah, definitely.
By the Jamaican Prime Minister and by Jamaica, and you know, the fact that there's a sense of entitlement. I think that citizens, Black citizens, or some Black citizens of the United States need to check themselves on.
Well, I think it's a minority, and I as I said, I think I heard.
I did say some.
Yeah, I think it's a minority, but I do always find it amusing when we have to have that kind of pitting against each other conversation, and I'm like, we're all in the same thing together, and that is a Western construct to believe that it's not and it's all of us, and we're if you think you're free and I'm not free, then we're not free. Like we're all working together on this. It cannot
And
just be you alone. We have to learn about this as a global issue. It's not
mm,
just a singular nation issue.
yeah, in addition to that, I'd just like to say that, supporting Jamaica in its efforts for reparations only strengthens the case for
That's
your
right.
position
Yeah,
regarding reparations.
absolutely.
Once one domino falls, the rest are going to be weakened
Whole
and more
house of
likely to have to
people.
fall in line. So here's the reality: if you can get reparations for one of the smaller countries, one of the smaller nations, it only
Mm.
strengthens your position. So instead of saying, us
It's first.
first,
Let's say them first.
just say someone first.
let's get one of us over the post. And since the Jamaican president so boldly said it, let us do it. Let us back him 100%. My step family will be proud of me at that point. But yes, I mean I don't know what to say, but that was my first story, and it was my most delightful story. It goes downhill from there, but it was at least the most fun story we have this evening.
Well, it was requested that we do something light on the dark side.
Right?
So,
Where is he? Come up, man. He can't tell me you didn't laugh at the first story. Where are you?
listen, he won't be here for this one. Hey, it's Murphy's Law.
The day I make you all laugh, you're not gonna come. See? Somebody go tell him. Somebody go tell him. All right, so our second story is about Priti Patel. Priti Patel is the Home Secretary, right?
Hmm.
She's the Home. I said that very boldly, and then went, "Is she? She is. She is the Home Secretary in the United Kingdom. She she's a conservative. That's all you really need to know. So basically, the High Court has made a ruling in the UK that phones that were seized, the Priti Patel's policy, they had a secret policy under Priti Patel's guidance that they were seizing the mobile phones from asylum seekers on arrival in the UK. So if you arrived in the UK on any small boats or on anything that the UK deemed unlawful by any method, they were taking the mobile phones of those people, which then meant that if parents, children, family members were separated, they would not be able to find each other. If you were meeting family, of course, because a lot of people are meeting family in the country that they're arriving in, they would never be able to get in touch. And of course, you then had no rights to contact anybody. You couldn't tell anybody where you were. You couldn't tell anybody. You can get a lawyer. You're like, there's nothing. You can't do anything without a phone, right? And so they were seizing the phones, but the High Court has ruled that this is unlawful. It actually says that 3 asylum seekers had to take the Home Office to court, claiming that the secretary operated a secret blanket policy to seize mobile phones from people arriving across the channel. The men are from Iraq and Iran backgrounds, and they arrived during April and November and had their phones confiscated on arrival in Dover. They were told they had to provide their PIN numbers to the immigration officers, and then the immigration officers then downloaded all of their personal information from the phone. So the story gets worse. These people were really violating any kind of privacy. One of the claimants actually said that he lost contact with his wife and child and cannot find them due to not having his phone at that point at which the court case had to be taken. The Home Office admitted, yes, this practice is unlawful, and revealed that, we were going to self-refer ourselves for breach of data protection. That's what they said. After they were found, of course, guilty at the High Court, then they said, well, we referred ourselves because, that's what we do. This story is particularly painful, of course, because we are watching in motion, and I have 2 stories on refugees, which I'm going to talk about. We are watching in motion the different treatment of refugees. We are literally seeing what it looks like for refugees coming from war-torn areas where they are fleeing for their life, where who is the protagonist, right? Becomes important. So, of course, refugees coming from the Ukraine, the protagonist is Putin. That makes a difference. Those coming from Iraq, Iran, and so forth, the protagonist has been the West. It has been Britain. It has been, they are the ones that have been dropping the bombs and starting the wars there. So you've got this situation where while there is war and these people are having to flee for their lives, they're not being given the dignity, the human dignity that other people are being given. So yeah, this story is particularly painful. I think when they started talking about not only just that they were confiscating the phones as one thing, but you were mandatory forcing people to turn over the PIN number and then downloading all of their information and using it almost against them to hold them hostage, it really felt like we talk a lot about the dignity and human rights, etc. But when Brexit was voted and they said one of the things they wanted to repeal was human rights, this is what they're talking about. This is insane. This shouldn't be allowed to happen. So I'm sure we could talk a lot about this. But as I said, I have 2 news stories about asylum seekers and those people who are fleeing war-torn areas. Do you have anything you want to add to Miss Priti Patel's behaviour?
Listen, I think, yeah. I think it's probably best if you do the second story now, because I think there's a massive link between the two. And then,
okay, let me see if I can get them all up at the same time. Let me just get them all up at the same time. So the second story now is the tale of 2 refugees. And so basically what has happened is, let me see if I can get this up. Here it is. Right, so basically they decided to have a look at what was happening in Calais, France, over refugees coming into the port in order to move beyond Calais to the UK or to beyond the UK. Some people use it as a stepping ground to get beyond to other family members, etc. And so there's this movement of people that come through Calais, which need to be moved or housed or done something with. Well, notoriously there is the Calais Jungle that it's called, and it's a large camp where mostly refugees sleep in tents on the outskirts of Calais. It is so personally, I know that we've had feeding programs where our church has been involved in, where they've actually driven food to feed people over there, because it is literally a refugee camp. It is, and the treatment of the people is horrific. I mean, what happens is they're talking about the fact that if you come into Calais and you're in this part of this refugee camp, you are basically only being served by religious establishments, mosques, churches, a few restaurants, you know, a few buildings that have been established to kind of help deal with the people there, because they're not given any help, any rights, anything. And so what would happen is the police would come in and break it down, throw away their stuff. So what little stuff they're able to have, they break down. And so you have to keep your personal belongings on you at all times, like anything that is really needed, like your passport, your phone, anything like that, of course, you keep tied to your body. But if you'd managed to get a place to sleep, it can be thrown away at any time. It can be destroyed. And so people that are coming from very war-torn situations in Sudan, Darfur, Eritrea, in Iraq, Iran, and places like that, who end up in this camp and have managed to get themselves to a place where they're trying to cross and claim asylum. It's not working. And one of the things that they've said is that the French requested that the British set up a centre in Calais to deal with people who wanted to claim asylum in the UK, so that they could begin processing people and getting them to what it is. And Britain has point blank refused till now. They've said no, they will not do it. They are not going to make it easy for people to cross in or to even process them, so that they can then move on with their lives and actually begin to be processed to where they need to be, or to seek asylum somewhere else or anything. They're just refusing point blank to participate until the Ukrainian crisis, in which case they have now set up a refugee center. And those refugees that are coming from Ukraine who end up in Calais trying to get into the UK to claim asylum, because oftentimes people have family members, right? They have family members who've moved economically or for other reasons and have managed to get to other places. So they're trying to get to their family members. They're trying to get to people that they know or communities that they are aware of, or a language group that they can speak in, of course, because that's also important. But the Ukrainians that make their way there are being put up in hostels, are being given rooms, hotel rooms. They're being cared for. They're not having to sleep in tents, of course. And this week, the British erected their first refugee center to help deal with, but only the Ukrainians. So the only people allowed to go to this center are Ukrainians. And so you get this sense that if you come from Northern Africa, the Middle East, Asia, anywhere like that, where you have managed to come through to claim asylum and to actually make your plea, the British are trying to do everything to stop you. The French, of course, make it very uncomfortable for you to be there, because uncomfortable, I'm putting that politely. They make it downright inhumane. You know, the fact that you're just pouring water on people's tents and throwing them away and coming through with big trucks, and just it's horrible to think what people are facing. And the fact that it's only really charities that are working to help those people, to, like, you know, feed them, house them, you know, do things to actually make them have a semi-humane experience is quite frightening. But the fact that you could switch it just like that, you were able to switch it. And I'm not saying, and I want to say this very clearly, I'm not saying they should not do that for the Ukrainians. I think they should. I think they should do it for everyone. That is what I'm saying. You shouldn't just do it for one group of people. Have the rule and have it apply to all people. And if this has made you apply the rule that you will have a refugee center there to process people and to actually make that transition smoothly, whether they meet your criteria or not, and we can argue about that later. That's a different kettle of fish altogether. But the fact that you're not treating people humanely, you're not giving them any level of dignity or humanity that they deserve for being human, you think they are less and you're treating them as animals, is unthinkable. And the fact that you do that quite proudly and without even batting an eyelash, you set up the center you have refused to set up all these decades. You finally set it up, and then you put the caveat, only for Ukrainians. How dare you do something like that and use the Ukrainian people as the kind of this, well, we're doing our charitable good. You're using people's, and you're not even treating the Ukrainians fairly, because not all of them are getting through either. And the process is so arduous that only a handful of people have managed to get through to the UK anyway, despite having family members, despite having people who are obviously they're traveling towards, you point blank have refused. So I think that for me, these two stories side by side, this illegal way that the Home Office in the UK has operated and has inhumanely treated people on arrival, starts way before that point, when you see it, the illegal operations that they're doing. Every country has an expectation, according to international law, to take refugees. But somehow Britain, USA, like to manage to only apply this when it suits them and to whom it suits them. And, you know, that never suits them for black and brown people, right? The wars that you are propagating, the bombs that you are dropping, the problems that you are causing, that doesn't apply to us when we're dealing with that. But somehow it will apply to people when we have decided that they're our enemy too. And for me, that's just unconscionable. And again, because I know somebody gonna come up in here and say, oh, but she said she don't want Ukrainian people to be treated. No, I said fair treatment for everyone. Treat all people with humanity, with dignity. Nobody deserves to have to run out of their home because somebody else has decided that they're going to drop a bomb on your home if you don't give up your land. That's disgusting. That's not right. It's just not right. I don't believe in that in any case. But these two stories really made me kind of blood boil this week. Right, Mr. Storm, take it away. You wanted to link the stories. There's your link.
Well, I think they are directly linked, because here's the thing: the UK has set up these centers for the Ukrainians in France, right? So why is it that when the Ukrainians get there, The application forms are in English.
Like I said, the Ukrainians are not getting a fair treatment either. Like, don't get it twisted. They're not being treated nicely. They're being treated a stage above, but they're not
Well,
managing to. They require, when
I,
I
th-
heard.
I think what we need to recognize here is that actually this is all smoke and mirrors, right? The British don't want the Sudanese in, and they don't want the Ukrainians in, right? So what they're saying is, we're happy to help, house you, and the French are housing the Ukrainians. That treatment's unfair. But the bottom line of it is the
Come and see
British
Jack.
don't want anyone in. And so what they're doing is, hey, look at this pretty thing. Look at that pretty thing. But they're not taking you in. And they're doing everything they can to put obstacles in your way to prevent you from coming to Britain.
And so this links to a third story, doesn't it? Because it links to the story that the UK had the program where people could sign up to house Ukrainians, right? We can sign up to house a refugee if A, you could find one to sponsor, and
Yep.
B, so they're not going to like match people up. No, they don't not going to receive applications and then match people up. That would be easy, right? No, what they're going to do is you're going to make an application, but then you got to go find your own Ukrainian, and then they can come live in your house and you can house them, and they will pay you a set amount of month. Except for the fact that one family who was determined to do this because they really wanted to, bless them, they said it was over 15 pages of documentation that they had to fill in. And they, as one law professor, one teacher, said they had to, in the end, start writing a guide to how to do it because it was so complicated that they couldn't figure out the system. I want people to...
we need to just recognize and call out the bottom line, right? Now, as for the treatment of the refugees based on place of origin, or, as I said, let's call it what it is, color, that was always going to be the case. It was always going to be the case. European nations are great at telling other countries to accept responsibility, but are very poor at taking responsibility for the things that they have done. So the destruction that they have wrought in Syria, when the Syrian refugees come, they don't want anything to do with it. So they were never going to take on the Syrian refugees because it would mean that they had to accept responsibility. They never wanted to take in the Iraqi refugees because they would have to take responsibility. They never wanted to take in the Afghans because they would have to accept responsibility, right? And in fact, the British government, and taking in Afghans in particular, we all know they didn't want to do that because the ones that helped them, they left half of them back in Afghanistan. But we're happy to take out the dogs and cats.
Oh, that thing hurts the soul. How are you going to lead them people there to die? You're going to lead them people there to be lynched. What's wrong with you? These people helped you to build a better place for themselves, and you left them. Sorry.
Right. So they were never going to do that. In regards to the Ukraine, well, we've already said the British don't want to take in the refugees. The nations surrounding the Ukraine would be more willing to take in the refugees because there are some shared cultural similarities between them. There's a shared historical identity in some of them in terms of having been under the old USSR and lived under that regime, and not. So there's an understanding, compassion that goes out that is understandable.
There's also this sentiment that Ukraine is almost standing for the freedom of them also, right?
Yes.
We don't want Ukraine to fall, because if Ukraine falls, they are our freedom. They have stood for our freedom all this time, and standing up to Russia all this time, they have been standing for us too. And so there's that, as you say, that shared communal
Yes, because
feeding.
that history, that shared history, they
Mm,
understand that
mm,
what happens to Ukraine is quite likely to happen to them,
mm,
right? And this goes back to the policy of spheres of influence,
mhm,
right? And that ideology. So they understand that they are next in line
mm,
if Russia is going back or is taking a stance on regards to spheres of influence, then
mhm,
they're quite likely next in line. So
mhm,
there's a self interest
mhm.
in aiding the Ukraine,
Yeah, yeah,
um, but these countries have their limits,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Um, so it's going to reach a point where they're probably going to say no
Just
more,
can't. Unless you are
or
passing through, you can't, there's no way to
or
go.
they're going to push them further into other European countries.
Yeah.
And look, let's be real. The further north you go into the European countries, the greater likelihood that they're going to be xenophobic.
Well, there's that. Well,
Right?
I think it's interesting, as I say, because I think like the Netherlands, we have like a nationwide policy at the moment of how they're taking in Ukrainian
Mhm.
refugees, and so what they've said is every uh, district. I'm going to use the word district because I don't want to tie it to my Dutch friends saying not quite the right word. So district, each district is the word I'm going to pick, which is not a Dutch word, just to help myself out of that ditch. Has to take so many refugees, right? And so when they're full of that, then they go to the next district and so on until and everyone has got like let's say 2,000 refugees. So the councils, gemeentes, people who run local governments have trying to reclaiming buildings or to figuring out ways that they can house the refugees and so on and so forth. And then once you get to that number where we're full, then comes in a different plan. So they have a plan to actually have people come in and how to move the people throughout the country. And so we're beginning to see that border, of course, because we're on that border, so we see the border people as they come across. And yeah, so we're getting to see that now. What I said is interesting, of course, is within all of the different nations that you have within Europe, they all have their own colonial history: Spain, Portugal, Italy, Britain. But where you get these colonial powers, you do get this xenophobia. You do get these kind of challenging issues. And, Europe has a challenge staying together as it is. There is ideological challenges to this, and Brexit really brought that to the forefront. And now you're having this push of refugees that come through that is really challenging some of those ideologies. And so for me sitting here in mainland Europe looking at this from an outsider's perspective, as you say, xenophobia is an issue. You can see that this may be an issue that is going to come up. And on the other hand, I do see that there are some pockets of society who are very much for helping people. And so you've got this dichotomy that's happening. We had, after they pulled out of Afghanistan, you had massive campaigns from people within some European countries, which were, the Netherlands and Britain particularly, who were angry. Their citizens were furious at their governments. This is what you do. This is how you treat these people. And we're trying to find ways of getting people out and doing all sorts of things to do that. And there is still some organizations, companies, businesses, which are still in the business of dealing with, of course, refugees coming from there. And they've not changed. Even though the Ukrainian crisis happened, they've not changed their charity. Whereas other charities are like, oh, white people, let's change our charity, right? Let's change our people. So you see this real dichotomy of what's going to happen. It's going to be interesting. Sadly, this is going to play out in real time on real people's lives, right?
Yeah. Just to come back to something you mentioned, Pretty Patel is the devil.
Generally, I do encourage us to just fall back from calling people the devil, but I can appreciate the point that you're making.
Listen,
Listen, you know what? I'm just going to say this. Everything that's, if you would like to understand why Mr. Storm says Priti Patel is the devil, first, learn what the word devil actually means. That would be the first thing. So a lot of people think horns
Satan,
and tail, right?
specifically Satan.
The Satan. So learn what the Hebrew word actually means. Then look at what she's done. So if you learn what the Hebrew, so there's a bit of homework for you. Y'all can come back next week, learn what the Hebrew word means, and then look at what she's done and what she's always in the news for, and then go, the Satan. This might actually be a right thing.
Listen,
You can make up your own mind.
Listen, I'm also using it as a pejorative. Look, the reality is, if she was the first woman that was created according to the Hebrew tradition,
oh Lord, please don't do this, please.
The reality is, she will probably be given a snake to fruit.
Right, so moving on to our next story before we get too down that route. So I've got two more stories for this evening. I think you have one, so I'm taking up a lot of time here.
Listen, I got a few stories. I perhaps won't do the one that I was thinking of. Might do some others and save that one for another time. But
okay, so I want to touch on very briefly the P&O Ferries mess. I think it's really important to touch on the P&O Ferries mess since we're talking about the Calais Dover crossing, and P&O Ferries works a lot in the Calais Dover crossing, but beyond that, of course. P&O Ferries decided to sack all of its workers, 800 workers. They decided to unceremoniously sack on a Zoom call, I believe it was.
yes.
Anyway, they sacked them all. And the reason they sacked them all was cost cutting. So their workers cost them a set amount of money, £8, and where is it? Not very much if you ask me, but where is it? Where's the actual money? Right, £8.91 is the minimum wage, and they that's what they cost them. So what they decided to do was they were going to hire overseas workers and pay an agency, so that you can really understand the detail of this. They're going to pay the agency £5.50 an hour. Okay, that's below the minimum wage. And so the agency is going to take a cut. And what it amounted to was that the employees from India would be paid £1.50 per hour to work for P&O Ferries. So people have been protesting. They have been calling it out. It has been called illegal in some places. It is a whole big entire mess. I personally think you probably need to just stop trading, and some other business needs to start to take over, because this is not just close them down and move on. Don't let any of those people run a company ever again. It's heartless, it's wicked. Trade unions, we thank them for all of the tireless work they're doing, but they're bringing it to the forefront. There have been protests across Liverpool and other big cities which have P&O ferries coming out of them. These people, wicked. You're going to sack the British workers because you want to pay Indian workers to come and amount to working for £1.50 an hour, which we go buy not even a sandwich, not even a loaf of bread. You can't even buy a loaf of bread in the UK for £1.50 nowadays. Which inflation, what's that going to do for them? Oh, so you can keep your profit margins. Oh, mind your business. Mind your business. Big business. Do you have anything to say on that news story before I do the final one?
Well, I think this is a literal case of here come the foreigners to take our jobs. The problem is what P&O did is illegal.
Right.
Okay. It is illegal. There's no question about that. The problem is not just that it's illegal, but the greater problem in all of this is that there's no real recourse.
Oh, no.
Right. And so this is a problem within the law. So now they can simply just say, oh, we're going to pay you a bit of compensation and still move on with what we want to do anyway.
Yeah, close down the business. Close them down. I get that.
Right.
That would disrupt some things. Close them down. Shut them down. No. Give somebody else the business. No. You can't be trusted. Can't be trusted. Anyway, sorry. It's your turn.
Yeah. So, look, I think one of the real, there are further impacts of this story. that is that it's going to drive a lot of communities further into poverty, because, well, we're talking about predominantly a few coastal towns, and of course, unemployment is going to hit them a lot harder. But you're also going to probably see an uptake in racist and xenophobic behavior within these communities, because the optics of it are literally, here come the foreigners to take our jobs, because you have literally sacked British workers to give the job to foreign workers who you are exploiting. And the problem is that people don't see the exploitation of those foreign workers. They see the problems and the hardships that have befallen them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the story that people need to see is, you should be upset at what has happened to you. You should be hurt by what has happened to you. But you also need to ask the question, how bad is it that someone will come and do your job for 1/8 of what you were doing it for? How bad was that person's situation? Right? That person's situation was so bad that they're going to be exploited. So your issue should be with your employer, because your employer is the one that sacked you to do this. Your employer was the one that was exploiting you for the £8 something an hour in the first place. Your employer is the one that is now exploiting these people. Your employer is the one that is getting away with it. Your employer is the person you should be upset with, and your politicians are the people you should be upset with, because they are the ones that make the
Allow this legal
legislation
loophole,
to
right?
allow for these things to happen.
You should be fighting for the rights of those people that are coming too. Like,
Right?
listen, it's not right.
So, I think there's a lot of issues in this, and a lot of education needs to be done. And I think part of the problem is that people in these situations don't see beyond the situation that has happened to them
Mhm.
immediately. Rising tide lifts all ships. And if you improve the lot of these people, you will eventually improve your lot. And just to
But
factor
companies
into
won't
this,
be doing it again.
just to add into this, if your nations weren't exploiting workers in India and all these other countries and driving their wages down, they wouldn't currently be in Britain taking your job.
Oh, now.
Right?
We
So
got it.
you need to look at the fact that this exploitation is taking place globally,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You need to understand that your countries and the companies that originate in your country
Mhm.
are the main protagonists
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
So look at this. When they shut down production in Britain, in the US, in European nations, and moved them to India and China, Taiwan, all of these places, and they're simply doing it because they can do it for cheaper there. Right?
What you said.
That's the bottom line of it. They're doing it because they can do it for cheaper there. So rather than pay
Mm.
workers in their own countries a fair wages, they're going to go exploit workers in another nation. And then what does
Ensure
that
that they
do?
always keep their profits up. It's not to ensure that.
It keeps their profits up, but
That's
what
it.
it does
Stop the
is
profits.
that what it does then is that it suppresses wages in their home nations.
Yeah.
Right? So when the wages are suppressed in their home nations, they get to charge the people in their own nations, or sorry, they get to pay them less than they should do. So
Right?
they're going to continue to ship out so that they can further suppress wages in their home nations. Right? Once those wages are suppressed so low, what do? They go, well, okay, now we can afford to just get rid of y'all, because the compensation you have to pay is linked to the duration that you've been in your job. So it's your loss of earnings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So by suppressing your wages, they get to pay you less in compensation. and then they take the workers from the nations that they're exploiting, to which they've shipped your job out, to then come in and work for less. Right? So it's a vicious cycle. And until you understand what's happening, and until you start campaigning for yourselves to get fair wages, but also the workers that they bring in to get fair wages, you're never going to get anywhere.
No. It's a divide and conquer system. If we can divide you and continue to hold you in that position, then we're gonna win, basically. Divide and conquer.
Yeah, look, I think this is one of the things that the British government has been very good at. The Tory government in particular has been very, very good at the idea of divide and conquer, because I think you need to look at the relationship between Black people and trade unions, the Windrush generation and trade unions, where there were a lot of trade union members initially that wanted to keep Black people out, and the trade union leaders were very much so, no, a rising tide lifts all ships. If we do not fight for their rights, your rights will be impacted. And so Black people joined trade unions in the UK in massive numbers. And that increased the power of the trade unions, because a lot of Black people, when they're coming over, will be employed in menial jobs. But these jobs are vital, as once again COVID should have shown. Your cleaners, your garbage men, your orderlies in hospitals, all of these low-paid jobs, once they went on strike, your services ground to a halt.
Right, whole nations can crumble under that.
So it increased the power of the trade unions to then place pressure on employers to raise wages, right? And this is what people need to understand. You can't just go ahead and say, it's just that group over there, or it's just that group over there.
It's not just the group over there. And this is the same, it's the theme of what we've been talking about. This divide and conquer mentality, no matter what it's applied to, it's going to have a negative effect on all of us. If we go back to the famous quotation, if you ain't free, none of us are free. That's the reality. If we continue to prop up the system in order that because we don't like you, then I'm never going to be free. They're never going to treat me good. This is never going to work. And the same is true for the refugees coming through. I'm not trying to get you less. I'm trying to get everybody more. We're all fighting this case here.
Absolutely. The treatment of the refugees, or the differential in treatment of the refugees, when I first read these stories, they made me think of Sojourner Truth and her line, "Ain't I a woman too?"
Yep.
And the question is, ain't I a refugee too?
You're right. But it's quite interesting, the lack of anyway, let's not do that. Let's do something else. Let me bow out of that conversation before I get sucked in to another thing. Final story from me. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. See my next happy story. Well, I say happy story. Give this woman her flowers. Like, she's amazing. She deserves all the good things. Like, go ahead, be a Supreme Court judge. Do your thing. Like, go do you. Putting her, all of her flowers aside. What is wrong with that country? What's wrong with these people? What did we just witness? Honest to my goodness, I couldn't even understand. This woman somebody put the credentials up for me so I could visualize it, because of course I'm not an American. I'm not from the USA. I'm not a citizen of that country. I have just been subjected to a lot of your history, because that's the way the world works. Okay. So but what mess was that? Literally, so for months we've had the whole conversation about who he was going to pick, and you can't just pick someone based on their color when, hello, you're asking us to do the opposite, right? So just notice that for a brief minute. The ironic hypocrisy. You want me to pick you because you're white, but you don't want me to pick someone because they're Black. Mind your business, number one. Number two, not based on her gender. Are you taking a mick? Y'all need more women up there. You can't have a Supreme Court with only what, 2 women? Are you insane? How is that a Supreme Court? Like what? So 50% of your
Because,
population is
well,
2.
first of all, I think you need to acknowledge. Yeah, I think you need to acknowledge that from its inception, the Supreme Court there has been mislabeled. It's actually should have been more accurately the Supremacy Court.
Okay, because it don't make no sense. It don't make no sense. And then this next thing of partisan picking of candidates. What kind of mess is that? Like, who decided that was a good way to pick people to serve on a judicial system? Who, which white person? Because I can only think that you lot. What were you like? Why is that? So you want these people who are going to be serving on the highest courts of legal systems to be judged based on the party they're affiliated with? What has that got to do with their ability to do the job? And I say that deliberately because when you then see the credentials of these people, no disrespect, but you're taking the mick. You're absolutely taking the mick. The white men who have been in those jobs have less than credentials that need to be in those jobs, right? Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson has done it all. Like literally, flowers, give her props. But this is what I want to talk about. Why does she need to go through abuse, and why is nobody saying it's abuse? Like, what kind of traumatic system? And then have the nerve to say, this is what a strong Black woman looks like. No, this is what a woman looks like when she's being abused and she has nobody who's defending her. Are you insane? Y'all shouldn't, like, props to her. She's clearly a very strong, very, very composed, calm. If only we could all be so calm under pressure. And at the same time, why should we? Why should you stand there and tolerate the mess that she had to put up with? And when I say she had to put up with, I use that word deliberately because should she have given, and there was a moment when she gave the Black mother look to somebody, and I was like, praise God, she like, you know, she gave that look, and I was like, hallelujah, hallelujah. Because I was just like, somebody needs to look at these people like they are as insane as they are. How dare you be as abusively disrespectful and then say she's a strong Black woman? Yes, that's how strong Black women behave. No, that is how a woman who is being abused by the system and who has nobody saying, we're going to stop this process, this is out of order, all of you outside, do your job, or don't come in the room. Because that's the reality. And you'll be asking her to make simple definitions and talking about reading children's book. The woman is a judge. She's there to do the Supreme Court judge. She's not there for interview over your toenails. What's wrong with you people? Honest to my goodness, this thing irritated me because it's a stereotype. We did a whole Darkside on the strong Black woman identity, and the fact that that was being perpetuated as a positive plus wonderful thing. And I'm not saying she's not a great, wonderful, this woman has worked hard, she deserves every piece of flowers, clapping, everything. But what? And
well,
the reason,
I think where the idea of the strong Black woman, where you see the real problem with it, is the contrast in the fact that she's not able to be free. And I say this because you can have accused a sexual predator in Brett Kavanaugh, get
he
up
was
there,
angry,
right?
cussing,
Angry,
carrying on,
cussing, crying,
raise, flinging things around, carrying on like a
right,
small child. He was allowed to do all of that. And people said, isn't he passionate? Are you kidding me?
right. Okay. And so when you look at this, it's she doesn't have the freedom to be herself in these spaces, right? But this white man who is able to cry, to throw tantrums, to shout, to point fingers, is passionate about defending himself and his reputation. And if she had turned around and said, yo must have fell and bumped your head because you all done lost your mind, she would have been seen as aggressive.
Oh,
right?
speak on it.
So I think, yeah,
She had
when you
to.
look at
This
the
is the face
contrast,
of trauma. She had no choice. She had no other way to behave. That's not about being a strong black woman. That's about having to deal with trauma on the spot, being traumatized further, not having your freedom. Shireen says triggering for all of us as we can relate to the abuse. Maybe that's why I feel passionate about it. I've been in rooms where people have done that foolishness to me, and you had to
of course
just,
you do. You work for the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
I'm like, I had to just, you had to just asking me where my husband, what he do, foolishness. What am I gonna be? He working for you? No, don't ask me no foolish questions. Listen,
Well, if they want to ask me what I do, I'm happy to show them in the parking lot.
stop your mess. Anyway, listen.
What?
The
I'm
thing
just
is,
saying.
we witnessed a level of trauma and a level of control that black women have to have in the face of some madness. And of course, I can look at the images, I can look at the moments where her daughter and her husband were looking at her lovingly, and then I can hear people criticizing and carrying on. Like it was just a never-ending stream of watching the abuse of black women happen in technicolor dream coat vision, televised around the world. And this woman, I know she has good people. I heard her friend introduce her. I know she got good people who's got her back. But the system has to change. You cannot tell me that is a correct system. What mess. What an absolute mess of a system is that. That mess right there. The Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Foolishness, right?
Yeah. Look, I think she has a good support network around her. I want to say her husband has clearly been doing some reading.
Amen.
Which is good. Yeah, so he's obviously put in the work and understands what it means to be married to a black person and have to
Yeah,
raise
of course. Raising black children, his daughter.
children. So I think that's to be commended that she has the support from
Yeah.
within her family.
But I'm sorry to say, but the US justice system is a mess from the top to the bottom. I'm sorry. The more I see, the more it gets like, oh, I don't know how you people are living through it. I'm praying for you all. We're giving you your claps and your flowers, but we're praying for you. We're really rooting for you to really overturn the system and manage to have a system that really works for the favor of
Oh,
the people. Because that system that y'all have going on there, they're not normal. They're not right. They're not righteous. No. Mm-mm.
it's not righteous, and I think it's the extreme of what justice systems look like. But I think this is a global problem. When you see justice systems around the world, these are global issues. It's just that you see the consequences played out in the US to the extreme.
Oh yeah.
And that's because essentially governments, countries, nations are set up on the concept of power and might is right. And so when you establish a system of governance based on that principle, it's never going to bend towards the interests of the populace. It's always going to bend towards the interest of those that are in power. And the US, from its inception, was very much so based on the concept. I mean, there was no, there's no pretense about, this community grew or whatever. You went over there, you slaughtered
Well,
the
people
people
left.
that were there, you
Yes.
stole the land. And when you expanded westward,
Oh
the
Lord.
concept of governments, of sheriffs, of all of this was literally who has the most guns, right? There's
Who
a
has
reason
most
it's
guns
called
and
the
is
Wild
willing to
West,
kill people, right?
right? So you're never going to have
No.
a system of justice come out of those principles if those principles were there in the foundation of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really scary, but that's my piece. I
Yeah,
began with a fun story. I ended with a fun story. I've taken
right.
all the time.
I just want to address this comment from Shireen. Let me tell you something. Nobody wants me as their pastor because I ain't here for this mess.
Listen, you hear him on the show. You want him to be a. You sure you want him to be a pastor? You're sure? You're sure? Sure?
Listen,
You're sure? Nobody want that.
you want to put me in that job? Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you have to pay me adequately because you ain't paying pastors adequately. That's number one. Number two, if you're going to pay me what you currently pay me, you best rest assured I ain't here for this mess. Right?
Woo! Listen, he
pay
holds
me to do a certain amount of work. I giving you the work that you paying me for. And one of the things you are not paying me for is to put up with people's stupidity.
Oh Lord! Oh
right?
Lord! Oh Lord! Oh Lord! Oh Lord!
You don't want me for that.
Oh Lord! Oh Lord! And
Yeah.
this is his tame version, folks. This is the tame version of Mr. Storm over here.
I'm just going to be real. If I was employed by the church, and okay, I'd have it easier because I've got a sausage and 2 beans, right? But if I was a woman, I'd literally be filing a new lawsuit weekly.
Yeah, our women don't have it easy, man. Our women don't have it easy.
Right? I'm like, I'm not here for that mess. I'm not here for that mess. And when a female colleague files a lawsuit, guess who's going to sign up to be a witness? I saw all of that mess. Because guess who's going to be calling out that mess when it happens? Yeah?
That'll be you.
Right? It'd be like, judge will be like, did anyone see this happen? I'll be jumping up and down. Me, Your Honor. Me, Your Honor. I'd be snitching on these people. Right?
Oh, dear. Well, at least everyone now knows that the fire runs in the family. So when they meet the fiery, stormy children that we have, they're not surprised. Okay, good, excellent. Now, you had a couple news stories. I gotta hold my tongue. Go ahead.
I had some other news. I had a news story that I wanted to do, but that's probably deserves a longer show. And that was the one into the Met report, the report from the Metropolitan Police regarding their departments and procedures to deal with corruption within the ranks. So we'll probably shelve that one for another day. But that's
all right. So the Met Police's approach to corruption is not fit for purpose. There was the Met Police, for those of you that tune in from abroad, and we love you for doing that. We thank you for joining with us. The Met Police are the in the UK, so Metropolitan Police there, and not fit for purpose is hilarious. So they've had their own report done. This is on the back of reports that have said they're institutionally misogynistic, they're institutionally racist, and the list gets longer. So now their own corruption service is not fit for purpose. So we could quite easily do a show that uncovers the kind of whole report. But that's just a little bit.
I said it before, I say it again. Dick by name.
Well, so that is a good story, and maybe we'll do it next week. Should this week go quieter than last week? I mean, last week was just a plethora of stories that we have shared today.
There was another story I was looking at that I think I might shelve because, to be honest, I think it probably deserves more looking into. And that was that they did a research into gamers.
Right. Yeah, you were telling me about this.
And what the study showed, I think is actually reflective of the world at large, is that girl gamers were less likely to be accepted within the community and to receive abuse from the community. Sorry, they were less likely to be accepted within the community more likely to receive abuse when they were good. They'd receive it anyway, but when they're good, the chances of that increase. And the reason for this was that the guys that weren't so good could not handle disruption to a male-dominated hierarchy or power system.
Bloop, bloop. You
but
understand.
What they found was the competent male gamers were more willing to accept women and girl gamers into these spaces, and they were accepted for their skills, right? And I think you probably see this played out in society at large, which should indicate to you that you have a lot of incompetent people leading your countries and governments.
Oh, now.
Right?
Oh,
You have
now.
a lot of incompetent people leading your companies, right? Because women's subject to abuse within these areas, and the more competent they are, you find the more abuse they receive. And I think the example of Katenji Brown is a highlight or an example, a very recent example of that, where she is more than qualified for the position.
I mean, like her qualifications, like round of applause. The other male judges, my goodness, they don't even have 1/10 of what she has. No
But the
wonder.
abuse that she has received, in addition to being black, is also because she is a woman
Uh-huh.
walking into these spaces and
Uh-huh.
disrupting systems of power. So,
Because
as I
it's
said,
not
I
like the
think,
women that haven't gone before that are of different ethnicities
yeah,
haven't received the same abuse, right?
yeah. So I haven't actually had a chance to read that full paper yet, but it's on my list of things to do. Yes, I do sit down and read these full research papers.
He does for fun. For fun, indeed. That's
Um,
why we have such a wonderful time on this show discussing news stories because he reads them for fun.
right. So the stories that I do actually want to mention are, the first one is related to the Ukraine.
Okay.
Okay. But from a different perspective. So the World Trade Organization has
Right.
said that there will be food riots in poorer nations due to richer food producing nations hoarding, similarly to what they did with the vaccine. Okay. So let me
Here we go
translate
then.
what they mean by poorer countries:
Black and brown.
African, black, and brown nations. Right? That is
World
essential.
majority nations. World
Right?
majority nations.
So, what they note is that many of I say many, 35 or up to 35 African nations depend on countries around the Black Sea region, in which Ukraine is located, for their wheat supplies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, of course, once that's disrupted, and the Ukraine's a major producer of wheat globally, then what you're going to have is the richer nations hoarding,
Mm-hmm.
which makes no sense because the prices are still skyrocketing, even though you're hoarding.
Yeah,
Right.
right. You have such a good supply, but you're somehow managing to do the prices so high.
Right. So they expect food riots within these nations. Listen, I
I don't think it's going
I
to
can
be
fully
only
envision.
those nations that are rioting. You
Well,
see
I'm
the
like, I
price
fully envision that because I expect Western nations to start rioting if
now.
these
That right there.
prices increase. Right. So I don't expect, and I'm not trying to be xenophobic or anything nationalistic, but the French in particular have a history of taking to the streets
Hey man,
in issues like
that's
this. They were
that's like
doing it over
wolves.
gas prices not too long ago,
That's
right?
that's that's their MO. That's what they do, isn't it? It's the French
Right.
way. You
So
don't like what you're doing?
I'm
Take to the
like,
streets.
yes, I understand it is going to disproportionately hit African nations, but let's be real, it's going to hit all nations because it's not that there isn't enough to go around. It's that companies are trying to fleece people out of
You
things,
see
right?
that? And this is where my little comment comes in. Because my comment is this: the world produces enough food. That's not the issue.
Well, we did a show on this.
We did a whole show. And I would like to just remind and point out to the people the issue isn't that there isn't enough food or that there is too many people. It's that greed continues to be the problematic factor. You want to make such a big profit that you're willing to charge people through the nose and bottlenose supplies, bottlenose all of these things to force people to spend astronomical amounts of money on things that you know that they need. Why? Because you can. Because you want
Yeah,
profit.
right. So But there's also another knock-on effect to this, which I did not know.
Okay.
And this becomes a real problem
But
because
the other problems aren't real.
no, but I mean, like for nations that are already struggling,
Okay, go on.
because the Ukraine accounts for half of the wheat given to the UN's World Food Program,
Oh,
right? Which means that when there are famines and disasters, and the
this is
UN
going on.
goes into these nations to help out,
They're
half of
carrying
their
Ukrainian
supply
wheat.
is from the Ukraine, which
Oh my
means that
God.
these countries that are already struggling are going to struggle even further,
Come on now. Come on now. Speak on it.
right? So for me, I think that was a real dark side to this that isn't
Mm,
known and isn't
mm.
explored. Just how much Ukraine is actually donating to these charitable sources.
Wow. Who
Well, I
knew?
say donating, they
They get
probably
paid, you know.
they get paid for it, but it's
Yeah.
probably below market value, I would think.
Well, it's the great myth that a resource-rich country such as Ukraine has a wealthy population.
Mm, yeah.
The resource-rich countries notoriously
Mm,
somehow manage not to have wealthy populations, right?
right. So, there's a real irony in this, in that the Ukraine is now going to probably be looking at, well, it is a disaster zone right now. Could
Mhm.
quite well is probably going to be facing famine, and half of the wheat support source comes from that country.
They have it right there. They can't
So,
access it though.
well, the thing is, they can access it. What they can, they need, which means it's not getting out,
Not leaving. No, no.
right? So, yeah, that was my first
On your
story,
dark side. Yeah.
my dog side. My second story comes out of Chile.
Okay. We haven't done a story from Chile before.
No, well, I try to,
Mixing it up. Mixing it up.
yeah, yeah, I read a lot of stuff. I come across a lot of stuff. So this story comes out of Chile, and it's where a whole set of schools had to be shut down due to complaints of sexual harassment and sexual violence. Right
I like this story actually.
now, what you have to bear in mind is that it's only in the past few weeks that in-person learning has returned to schools in Chile due to COVID, and they are already shut down due to sexual harassment and violence. The students are on the streets protesting. And I have to say, those Chilean students are different, right? Because I have been in Chile when they have been protesting. I've been in Santiago when they've been on the streets protesting, and
Same play.
they don't care, right? They
Same play.
really don't care. So I'm telling you this as a first-hand witness to when they take to the streets, they happy to take to the streets. I'm talking about earrings off, Vaseline on, all the rest of it.
They're waiting to they're trying to deal with it.
Yeah. So,
Oh my gosh, the stories that are coming out of Chile are awful.
yeah, right? So
Oh, look this story up. This is horrid.
what was going on in this set of schools is that boys were sharing nude pictures of girls within their class on Instagram without their knowledge or permission. But they were also having group chats about gang raping girls and their classmates.
And they did it.
Okay,
Some of
right?
them have done it.
And there is a story of a 14-year-old girl who was raped during a lunch break. Right?
In a classroom. Let me put this
Yes,
into context.
yes, at school, in a classroom. Yeah,
Classroom
yes, during a lunch break.
by an older boy during lunch break.
Yep.
Hey, I have questions.
Right.
No wonder the school needs to close. Yes, the school does need to close. Yes, the young
Well,
people
it's
do.
a whole set of schools. It's not just one
They all
school.
need to know, but they need
It's
to
a whole
close.
bunch of schools, right? But as I said, schools have just returned, and they are reporting already a 56% increase in harassment and sexual violence. The students are reporting this, right? Compared to 2018. You just returned.
56% increase. What are people doing? What are people doing? Who teaching these children? You know what's really scary about that is, what is the environment like at home that facilitates you walking into the school in that kind of condition? Because you've been at home, right? Because sometimes what we do, I should let you finish before you say this, but I'm kind of curious because sometimes, and particularly in Western context, a lot of what is said is that, of course, young people are socialized together as a group now, something that historically hasn't been done, but now you got this kind of historical socialization together, so kind of a lot of their time is spent away from their parents, and so therefore their deviant behavior is kind of shared within the group. These kids been at home.
What I will say is that part of my time when I was in Chile, I spent a few months there trekking and doing different various things. I was involved in a community project that was building a shelter for victims of domestic abuse. And one of the things that I saw there in the community that I was in, and so I have to speak to the community that I was in, where I was building the shelter, was a mining community. So it wasn't particularly wealthy. One of the problems that they were dealing with there was alcoholism. And that's because of poverty. You speak to the people there, and you speak to some of the children there, and they didn't see a way out. Where we were was their life, and they could not see beyond the place that they lived. So you had a fair amount of domestic violence within the area. Um, and hence the need for the shelter that was being built. And I think that's part of the problem that we need to address, that links into the earlier story of exploitation, of global exploitation, where people and young children don't see a world outside of the place that they live, right? It leads to despair, leads to all of these things. But I think also it links to the earlier point where we were speaking of a certain demographic within the US, the small portion that feel entitled. Because you're now dealing with the perfect storm of mixing of despair and entitlement. And people feel they are entitled to women or a woman's body. With the despair, well, if I take it because I should have it, what's the worst that could happen to me? Lock me up and throw me in prison. Well, guess what? I'm seeing something different than the area that I grew up in.
I'm living in prison now. What difference I'm making? Basically.
Right.
At least
So,
there I'll be fed, right? It's one of those. At least I'll get meals and I'll be warm and dry.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Santi has asked, increasingly over 2 years' time. No, it's the period, the same period, 2018, the same period between 2018, or the same period for 2018 versus the same period for 2022. There has been a 56% increase.
It's a leap. It's not an increasing, it's a leap. Oh, this was that comment, sorry.
Yeah.
It's never 2 periods. This comment was what's happened and changed our environment for the students to become so violent. But we've talked about this socioeconomic reasons in which children are being raised.
Listen, I think at both ends of the spectrum, you create problems. One is despair, and when you're at the other end of the spectrum, it's entitlement.
Yeah, add the two mixed together, and there you have this. You have the gendered entitlement coupled with the despair, and voila, you got the perfect storm, unfortunately, for these young girls, and very sadly for one young girl in particular. I mean, the
No,
father's.
I think you'll find it's more than one girl.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, the father's comment was heartbreaking. I put my trust in the school, and they returned me a daughter who's been raped. I mean, that just it's like Jesus. Like, it's just what is this? No, but I mean, the fact that you have campaigners there, 21-year-olds who are campaigners, who are out on the streets, who are doing the work for this and have been trying to fight for this. And we've seen it over time with Chile. This has come up time and time again with the campaigners there happening to raise awareness about gendered violence and the treatment of children, girls, women, wives, etc. It's really frightening. It's really scary that there are women around the world who live in this daily fear.
Yeah, I mean, I will be interested to know how, or yeah, I probably have to see if a study was done on this. The impact of the macho Latin American culture versus and how it has mixed with colonialization to create these sort of forms of identity and entitlement and abuse, these systems of abuse, because I think it's very interesting to question which came first, right? Was
But
it the sense of entitlement that leads to the machoism, or is it the fact that you felt a sense of despair, so you had to then put on a bravado that leads to the sense of entitlement?
Yeah.
And yeah, I said it will be interesting to see which came first.
The egg or the chicken, I think, in that one. The egg or the chicken. I mean, there is a report currently out by the UNESCO who have talked about the fact that gendered violence has increased tremendously. Gendered violence, so violence against women has increased tremendously in schools and in young people during the COVID lockdown, that this has been a worldwide pandemic of gendered violence amongst young people. So I think it's I'm just having a look on at the report now, just very briefly, but that might be another one that's worth looking at, because it's actually quite scary, to be honest, to look at some of the headlines that come through this and how girls around the globe are being affected by this. And that is not to say that there isn't violence against boys. Of course, we always say that there, we have to acknowledge that, but the overwhelming majority of sexual violence is against girls, and the fact that it's on the increase after we've had this period of lockdowns is very scary. It's very scary that it's jumping as high as it is. People are just getting back to spaces where everybody is beginning to have contact again, and gendered violence is increasing by such alarming rates. I mean, that's scary. That's scary. I mean, that's not a world that we want our children to be living in. That's not how we want it, right?
No, it's not how we want it.
Well, I can only say to everyone who's been watching, do you have another news story for tonight, or that was your final one?
I'm mindful of the time, so
you took me out on the depressing one. I'm just going to say, for those of you that watch normally and have asked for shows that have both lights and fun stories, we have tried to bring you a varied show today, talking about Will and Kate at the beginning, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, and some of the Darkside issues.
There's actually, just on the Will and Kate one, there's a video by Munya Chawawa.
Oh, listen, y'all need to go watch that. Go watch that.
You'll need to see it. It's
hilarious. Yeah, okay, yeah. Go watch that if you get a chance. I can't believe you got it out as quickly as you did, and it is as good as it is. Well done.
You know what? Let me just see how you spell this guy's name, so you can put this in. Yeah, Munya Chawawa. I'm probably butchering how you say his name. There we go. Yeah, there we go. But look at his William and Prince Kate Jamaica video.
Yeah, for sure. It is hilarious.
So yeah, anyway, yeah, sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
No, that's it. Right. Well, we're finished for today. We took you over, but we did a variety of stories. We are so glad that you join us here on the Dark Side for a chat about varied news topics and educational, informative discussion, taking an alternative look at the news today and giving you some insights. Yes, my darling.
No, I do you know what? I was just rereading one of the earlier comments from Shireen where she says, I love when Pastor Purple said they'd rather have her husband as a pastor, and she's laughing. I'm like, what are you trying to say about me as a pastor?
She's trying to say she heard you say you were going to give them hands in the car park, so that's probably not what they were envisioning. That's what she's trying to say.
What? As Christians, we don't believe in laying on hands?
Listen, she understood you. We understood you. Mind your mouth. Watch yourself. We know you. They know you here on the dark side. They understand that you got to lay hands and anoint people. Yeah. Which is why they're all glad that I'm the pastor and that you are the pastor's husband. Yeah. Praise the Lord. Amen. Hallelujah. Y'all. Peace out. Have a really great week. We've enjoyed talking with you. Thank you so much for all your participation. Please do join us next week on the Dark Side. Bear in mind that coming towards the end of April, we will have a vacation. So you only have a few more episodes with us before we vacation and take a break on season 4. Lay hands or catch hands.
Listen, how can I put this? You can catch me outside while I lay them hands.
Listen, on that note, I'm going to play.
How about that?